Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining this morning. Really appreciate it. I think we've got a great panel of guests here today to talk to you about kind of breakthrough innovations in career services from both an employer and a university standpoint. So I'll let our guests introduce themselves. Why don't you start, Jason, down at the end?
Sure. Jason Weingarten, co-founder and CEO of Yellow. We are a recruiting operations platform. We got our start. We graduated from college and are in the professional realm now, but we still have a really significant portion of our business is the Fortune 500 that have complex global recruiting operations specifically focused on campus. So excited to be here today and tell you a little bit about what our customers do.
Hi everybody, I'm Porter Braswell and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Jockwell, and we are a career advancement platform specifically for Black, Latinx, and Native American students and professionals. We work with about 150 organizations where they leverage our platform to ensure that they have a more diversified applicant funnel before they hire the best candidates for the job. Great.
I'm Maureen Joseph. As you can see, I have about 4 titles there if you're wondering why I'm on the panel. So I have the perspective from the corporation side of things. I worked at really large companies in college recruiting, and then now work for a really small company based in Chicago, Peak 6, and built out our campus recruiting program there. So I have kind of the perspective of small and big companies, which is why I'm here today.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Christine Cruz Vergara. I'm the new VP for Higher Education and Student Success at Handshake, which is a college career network that connects over 750 universities to over 300,000 employers and 14 million students. And my past experience was actually about a decade working in higher education, leading change specifically across the career education space.
Great, thanks everyone. And I'm Tice Henry. I'm from the Boston Consulting Group, one of the leaders of our global education practice. So I'm going to start from the university side. And so when you think about career services in a university, it's traditionally been pretty underfunded and really lacks kind of a seat at the leadership table. How quickly do you all see this changing, kind of with the increased focus on outcomes in higher ed? And what can we really do from a policy and practice standpoint to accelerate the change, to get universities really as focused on career services and recruitment as they do on actually recruiting students in? And anyone can.
Christine, you got to
start
with
that.
You got it.
Happy to. So I have a lot of opinions about this in particular. I do believe that career education needs to be at the table, but when I say career education, I don't actually mean specifically career services. I believe that career education needs to be owned by the entire institution. And so structurally, when you think about policy, when you think about the organization, what needs to happen at institutions is that they need to have a really strong leader that sits as high up as possible. Someone that is either in the president's cabinet, someone that is part of the particular groups that have the most influence at a particular institution. So for those of you in the room that have not worked in institutions, they are remarkably siloed and decentralized organizations that have a lot of complexity and different layers. And so every single institutional system has a different point of influence. And so at some places it's faculty, at some places it might be the provost or the deans, at some places it is the president, or it may be advancement because of the alums, right? And where the money is coming from. And so you need a leader that can catalyze and help to coordinate all of the efforts around career education to actually bring all of the necessary players to the table, because career education actually needs to be owned across career services, faculty and deans, athletics and coaches, RAs and student life and student support, right? It takes all of those individuals coming together. And so all of you in this room came from an institution, you graduated from an institution, and each of you collectively actually have a significant amount of influence in going back to your institutions and asking these questions and pushing for this, because it's the alums and it's the prospective parents and students that actually have the most sway at institutions in getting them to pay attention to this particular issue, and that it's really important and needs to be properly funded.
So it sounds like you're almost suggesting kind of a career services czar, like someone who would oversee career services. Can you say more about, is anyone doing this really well?
Yeah, so essentially what I'm saying is the amount of money that institutions invest in enrollment management and getting students in, they should be investing an equal amount of money in getting students out successfully. And so if you think about enrollment management as a particular division, you should essentially have career education be a division at the table as well. And so there are institutions that are definitely moving in this direction. Some of you probably went to his TED Talk yesterday, but Farouk Day, who has recently moved to Johns Hopkins, is very much moving in that direction. His position is Vice Provost, I believe, for integrated learning and life design, right? So that is something where he is now at the table with deans, with the research arm, in thinking about students' experiential learning holistically across their entire educational experience.
Yeah, there's one of the groups that I think do this really well are actually the law schools. So in law school recruiting, it is a traditional like outplacement firm, and they will actually go and they will set up all the interviewing. They will do an outcome survey at the end where if they miss on salary or they miss on placements, it affects their rankings. And if it affects their rankings, it affects their admissions, and it affects what they're able to charge. And so long term, and the MBAs have started to get much more like this. The top, I don't know, it's 13 now, MBA programs have something similar. We're starting to see that go through. I wouldn't be surprised, over the next 10 years that we start to see that as more of an ex-placement, outplacement type model.
Great. Porter or Maureen, anything to?
Well, I think my general perspective, so we work directly with the students, so we actually don't partner with the career service centers. But in my own experience, being a student and thinking through how I was going to find career opportunities, it was always through kind of external platforms or other organizations. And so I wish that the Career Service Center was more involved in my life as a student, because it was something that, you had to walk like 2 miles to get to, and that was like somewhat annoying. And then 2, like you didn't really, when you spoke to your friends, the conversations were never really about going to the Career Service Center. It was always about who do you know, what other organizations are you leveraging, and the reason why we started JobWell is because historically there have been traditional nonprofits that have been in this space. MLT, Inroads, SEO, Code 2040, amazing organizations that do great work, but they traditionally have kind of pigeonholed you into very specific industries. And if you didn't find your way within one of those organizations and you didn't know to go to the Career Service Center, you're kind of left to fend for yourself. And so that's why we started JobWell, to kind of level the playing field and to create a platform where individuals could be exposed to opportunities at scale, regardless of what school you go to or what organizations you were a part of. So I just wish in my own experiences that the Career Service Center was more involved. And I know I graduated from Yale, I played basketball there, and so I know that if I was struggling to connect with the Career Service Center at a school like Yale, it's happening to everybody, especially for folks of color.
Yeah. I mean, from the company side of things, similar to what Christine was saying, like career services is where you're supposed to go. From the company side of things, you're supposed to set up interviews, but then if students don't have access or aren't aware of what career services is doing, and there's not enough like marketing and branding there, I feel like companies maybe more from the smaller scale who maybe don't have the relationships with professors or other organizations who are trying to do some of those things, may not have kind of access to recruit more students as well. So I think I know an approach that we've used at really large companies was partnering a lot with professors, and you would want that to be more ingrained with what career services is doing as well.
I think this is also where technology, right? All of our work kind of comes into play, because I think technology can help career education, and again, I say that broadly, not just career services, but everybody that should care about our students' success. This is where technology can play a role in actually helping to scale and helping to reach the masses, because there's so much that is happening in education right now that actually can be automated and can use technology to their advantage, right? Like the idea 100%. Of where do students go when they want information? They go to their trusted network, right? And one of their trusted networks are their peers, right? And so like at Handshake, we have developed community tools to allow students to be able to access better information from their peers, to access reviews, to access Q&A, to be able to do peer messaging, so that they actually are able to access these opportunities that otherwise they wouldn't have been able to access before, and that can actually free up the institutions to automate like 80% of the things that they do, and then actually reposition and reconfigure their roles to actually focus on the high touch, high personalization things that require high levels of expertise.
That's a great segue into my next question, which is when you think about the role of employers from either the employer perspective or the technology perspective, who's really kind of leveraging technology in a great way to reach either diverse pools of candidates or kind of the best talent for their organization? Like, what are your power users on the platform doing differently?
So at Yellow, I would say our power users are the ones that have been the big traditional campus recruiters for decades, the ones that we believe have basically created the industry. So it would be an EY, a Microsoft, a JP Morgan Chase, and obviously Walgreens and Grant Thornton. So they've utilized us in similar to how Christine was talking about of repositioning the roles of the folks in career services. Yellow's enabled our customers to do that from a recruiting standpoint, whether it's we've all had to schedule a meeting and it's been a pain where you've got to have a whole bunch of people together. Imagine doing that for interviews over and over, where you have to meet with Christine, and then you can either meet with Maureen or her peer, and you got to meet with one of 30 people from JobWell. Go. Right? And so if you think about how Microsoft has to do that across 70 countries with hundreds of campus recruiters, that's a big problem that we're solving. And it enables them to really be great concierges to help ensure that not only are they sourcing the best talent, but they are becoming the employer of choice because they provided an exceptional candidate experience. And so it's been the traditional one so far. I expect that to change because as the technology gets better, more people are able to utilize it and do very unique things, and we're just starting to see that.
On our end, the companies that do it the best really are the ones that have recognized that they've been terrible about it in the past. And so they come to us and they say, this is traditionally what we've been doing. Like, what do you suggest we do to better authentically engage with this community? So they're completely rethinking how they go about recruiting and how they're connecting with diverse individuals. And so they become our power users because JobWell then has a role in shaping how they're communicating and connecting with our audience. And what we find to be so fascinating is that historically these companies have always taken this approach. And again, I'm a product of it, so we advise against it because I lived through it, where they would come, they would meet with all the black students and be like, diversity, diversity, diversity. And it's like, all right, that's cool, but what do you do as a company? Yeah. And they completely miss the mark. And so it's this very, now they're taking a more refreshed approach to how to recruit from this particular population. And those organizations that allow JobWell to really drive the best ways to go about that recruiting, they crush it on the platform.
Mm-hmm. And what are the leading employers actually doing as a firm once folks are in the door differently to make it a great experience and a kind of great environment for diverse range of recruits?
So there's a lot of different things that we're seeing that organizations are doing well. One, I would say it definitely comes down, there are a few things. One, it's like defining diversity. So this word diversity has become this huge umbrella term that almost means nothing depending on, you can make an argument that everybody's diverse to some degree. And so it's like, what are you actually talking about when you're saying diversity? So organizations that are willing to define diversity as it means to them and what they're actually speaking about do the best job when it comes to actually trying to change things within that vertical. We've also seen that it has to be like a top-down approach, that it has to be built within the culture. And if the executives and the board are talking about why diversity matters throughout the organization, everybody will buy in. But it has to be a part of the culture and it has to be ingrained. And then thinking about moving away from just being inclusionary cultures to cultures where people feel like they belong, and what does it take to drive cultures where people feel like they can bring their best authentic selves to work, and having those dialogues be conversations that people can actually engage in, no matter if you're an analyst or a partner within an organization. So there are a ton of things to retain this talent, but it's truly, if there's a general thing that we're seeing, it's really investing and being willing to adapt and change quickly. and not feeling timid to have these somewhat uncomfortable conversations. But if you can embrace all those different things, we're starting to see these organizations actually retain the talent. And that goes from college students converting to full-time employees scaling within the organization.
There was a Time Warner's last CEO, Jeff Bukes, actually had his bonus tied to diversity levels at the organization. It's the first one that I had ever seen do that. So obviously they invested a lot. One of theirs and many others are really from the definition standpoint. It's employee resource groups. And do you have the right employee resource groups? Are you marketing that to your to the next level? And it's not just race and ethnicity, but it's disability, it's veteran status, it's sexual orientation. So it is, and it goes across the board, and they have to be really impactful with how they're sending that messaging across the board.
And then Maureen, maybe you can, along these lines, can you talk a bit about recruiting women into, kind of fields where they're traditionally underrepresented?
Yeah, for sure. So we have done something at Peak 6 where, we are a small financial services firm, which typically has been very male dominated. And so one of our co-founders is female and very passionate about getting more females into the organization. So 3 years ago, we actually built a internship solely focused on women. And we actually don't even call it an internship, we call it an experience. Because the whole purpose was we wanted it to be more educational about the industry and why it's a really great career path, and frame it in a different way versus really trying to understand, and we did a bunch of market research to really try to understand why are females not working in financial services, or a lot of large companies were doing internship programs and they were getting in front of these females before we were, and so we wanted to do something a little bit different. So we actually don't even have male internships right now. We only have female focused internships for trading and technology, and we've seen a huge increase in terms of just even word of mouth, and more, we used to have a top of the funnel program problem where we weren't seeing enough females, and that has completely changed. And I think it's also just the way we framed the program, because I think we've done a really good job of not making it super traditional from an internship standpoint, but making it more come and learn. And if it's not the right fit for you, fine, that's okay. Like, go do something different and talk about this program, but we want people to learn more about the industry and learn why it could be a really great career for them. That's awesome.
Super. We've heard a lot of names of kind of big corporations who are partnering on your platforms, who are recruiting into these institutions. How do you think about democratizing kind of access to students, right? When you think about a Peak 6, a smaller employer, how do you think about getting, a wider range of employers actually engaged in the recruiting process and able to scale? And how can they use technology to kind of amplify their voice as kind of smaller employers?
I mean, I think Handshake has been huge for this. We were talking about this before we even started the panel, that I think back to my days when I first started out as a campus recruiter, and I had to go to each separate school to post our jobs. And that could take, a whole day to do if you're posting your job at 50 different schools. I mean, Handshake was huge in just being able to post at all these schools now and getting access to schools that we maybe didn't have access or just didn't have the time to do. So I think that, from that side of things, I think that has been huge for the company and recruiting side of things, because now we can focus our time on actually talking to students and telling our story, versus posting the jobs and then praying that people are gonna hopefully apply and hopefully we'll get to talk to the right people. So I think technology has made a lot of, I know that Yellow is starting to help with like interview scheduling, and just there's a lot of recruiting operations that has been a pain for recruiters, and so technology has played a huge role in actually streamlining a lot of that and making more time for recruiters to actually spend time on talking to students, talking about why the company could be a really great fit, working on that employer brand piece as well.
And I would just add in that I think with some of the peer-to-peer learning pieces that I just mentioned earlier around our internship reviews, our Q&A, and our peer messaging, we have found that a lot of employers, both large and small, have really taken advantage of that precisely to tell their story. So when students are leaving reviews on their internship experiences, for example, we're seeing a lot of employers are actually utilizing that as a tool for engagement and to be able to continue to build out their pipeline, to be able to respond to them and to keep them warm, to be able to tell the stories that they're looking for. We've built out a premium product for employers, and for those in particular, they're using those strategies to do better branding and customization to different pockets and different segments that they're looking for. And so that's been really interesting to sort of see how they're utilizing their alums as well, especially at the smaller companies, to build brand awareness. Because I think for those of you that are in the room, you're probably quite aware that for a lot of our college students, they know the big names, and it's a lot harder to get them to recognize smaller or mid-sized companies. And so these more personalized approaches through the technology and through the platform have really helped to elevate the presence of many of those organizations.
We've had a little bit of a different experience. So Yellow's now north of 200 employees. We hired almost 100 last year. Many were from college students. And at the large diversity conferences that we attend, it's every brand name and us. And if we are not the company that students are trying to go work for. And we talk about the big brands, obviously that's who Yellow services. But the reality is that over half of hiring of college students is SMB. So like they've been doing it effectively for many years. The difference and where I think we've seen success and what Peak Six is doing right now, specifically around recruiting events, is that the ability to capture the information and get it right to the hiring manager immediately so that the hiring manager can go and make that call, that's huge. Because the hiring manager and your team, they will tell the story, they'll tell the right story, and that way, there's thousands of brands that are influencing, all the students. So the ability to just speed of getting them right to the hiring manager, I think is something that the SMBs now have the power to do.
Mm-hmm. So we've talked about the kind of employer side and the career services side. What about the students? How do you drive students to actually be engaged on the platform, engaging with employers, getting the most out of the platform? Maybe Porter, you can start with, how you think about really reaching students directly.
So this also ties into a little bit of the last question. So Jopwell focuses primarily on, I would say like 99% of the companies that work with Jopwell right now are like really big brand names that we would all know of. Because the community in which we're trying to serve, they have different challenges than what a broader community of individuals may face. And so, which goes into this question of like, what are we doing basically to like drive this engagement with the students to these companies? And again, going back to my own experiences, when I was in college and like Goldman Sachs would come to campus, I would show up because I knew I wanted to work in finance, and I thought, okay, a bank, I could work there, and that was like, that was my existence. And so I spent 3 summers interning there in college and started my career there. But when like Google or Facebook or the NBA or whatever came to campus, I figured, well, there's not a role for me within those organizations. I want to do finance, so therefore I have to kind of work at a bank. And so what we're seeing is that, of course, if you've been successful in a lot of different walks of life as a student and you're pursuing rigorous coursework and you're studying certain things, you're qualified for a lot of different things. You don't have to be pigeonholed for a specific thing that meets your mind. But traditionally, we've been told to be successful, you have to be a doctor, you have to be a lawyer, you go into finance, maybe become a consultant, that's it. And so again, thinking back to what all the traditional nonprofits have done historically, they kind of put you in those very specific industries. And so the students that do the best on Jopwell are those that create full profiles. They talk about what their interests are. And so now when like a Spotify is coming to campus, they're getting individuals that may be pre-med. They may be poli-sci majors, because these organizations are now able to search and filter for what they define as quality, and these individuals are now being recruited where they historically haven't recognized that they were qualified for those opportunities. Mm-hmm. And so it's been amazing to see how like firm like Goldman Sachs are recruiting students that never would have associated their background being good for them, and companies like Facebook are recruiting finance folks who never thought I could do that at Facebook. And so it's been awesome to kind of see that happen on the platform.
Yeah, I mean, I think, going back to my experience, at Walgreens, like we looked at specific majors and we had GPA requirements and things like that. Like at Peak Six, we don't care what your major is. Like can you do the job? And do you have the skills to the job? Are you, self-aware? Are you going to work really hard? Like those are more of the things, those behaviors that we're looking for versus, what was your major or, what was your GPA?
Yeah, for us, we're seeing that the students that are most successful are those similar to what Porter was saying, that take the time to actually fill out their profile and to really make it broader in terms of the classes that they're taking, the projects that they're working on, the organizations that they are a part of, the interests that they have. We have a lot of questions that also allow them to really share not only their interests, but their geographic locations that they want to go to and things like that. And so there was actually an article in Reuters yesterday about some of the students that, as they filled out their profiles, were getting contacted from employers and having this really personalized experience and getting exposure to things that they never would have realized that they had access to. But what we're also learning is that students listen to other students, right? This is no surprise. Word of mouth has always been one of the most popular ways that marketing happens on any college campus or for students in general. And so as we think about that, we're really thinking about how do we leverage the relationships. We have some champion influencers already in terms of students that are on the platform. And so how can we take that and amplify that across all of our universities? But we're also thinking about, as we move into the fall season, how do we continue to open up access? Handshake's mission has always been to democratize opportunity for all students. And so we're really starting to step into more open access as well for all students. And so excited to see how we can use our student influencers to help get more students into the platform and to be successful and to find these opportunities.
I think the hardest part is that there's so many places now that students can create profiles. And it was really interesting. I spent a lot of time with a handful of diverse candidates that were software engineers or mechanical engineers that could get hired by anyone. And I asked them, like, where do you have profiles at? So they were Handshake, they were with Jopwell, they were with LinkedIn, they had stuff with Piazza. Like there's 5 different places. And so I think there's the interesting part is how do we make sure that the students are getting the right value? Yeah. And again, these are students that, we call them the purple squirrels, right? You're desperately trying to find this to diversify your classes. And so I think it's going to be really interesting how a lot of these platforms evolve over the next 5 years. And I'm excited to kind of be an active participant and look through it. So.
When you think from the university perspective in terms of emphasizing more the career services and recruitment arm, how do you think about metrics and outcomes? Like how should we be tracking, university outcomes to get them more focused on, ensuring students are getting the right majors, leading to the right jobs?
Well, this is where I'll disagree with you, since ASU was looking for some debate here. Sure. Majors don't equal a career, right? We just heard that from Maureen. We hear that from employers all the time. And so I think the question is less about helping students to select the right major, but helping them to figure out what are those decision points, right? So I was at this fabulous breakfast yesterday with one of our social impact partners, CZI, and we were talking about learning science and how do you really take the elements of how students learn and how they make decisions, especially within the career development process, and how do you start to build that into your product? And how do you think about that journey? And so I think it's much more about, let's be real, the frank outcome is always going to be whether or not students are finding meaningful opportunities. But I think the thing that hasn't been focused on is whether or not that opportunity is actually meaningful, right? So everybody's tracking, or people are starting to track where graduates are going. What we haven't done yet is really track mid-career success and mid-career outcomes. For a lot of the liberal arts institutions, that's really where you're going to see value, and that's something that isn't happening, not at a national scale, right? Like you look at Australia, you look at the UK recently, you look at China, you look at all these other places, there are tons of countries that have already started through government mandate to actually collect these outcomes, and the US is behind in terms of us not having a standardized national way to actually look at all of that. We have protocols through NACE, we have some guidelines, but we definitely don't have anything that is sort of mandated, and definitely not looking holistically. And so it's not just the outcome, but it's whether or not it was meaningful. And then, and of course, with that comes the definition of how do you define meaningful for a student. Somebody might not just want a high-powered job at Goldman Sachs because it pays a lot. They might find great meaning in teaching at their local regional public school district, right? And so who are we to judge whether or not that was good or not good for the institution? But I think actually talking about some of those components are really critical. And so I think if you look at the learning journey, then you have to start to define what are those particular outcomes in terms of engagement points that we know are essentially KPIs, right? Towards them being successful and making meaningful decisions towards those outcomes. And I think that's what we need to talk about. And I think the biggest thing that I've actually, this is my second year at ASU GSV, is there are very few higher education institutions that are actually at this conference, right? And I think if we want to help change education and we want to help do that together, we can't come at it from a perspective of we know best, we know better, and we're going to fix them. I think we need to actually get everybody at the table to talk about what are these issues, and we need to actually translate and understand each other in terms of a language perspective so that we can actually do it together, because the people in education are the ones that have to sustain this change. And so if we do it for them, nothing will actually ever change. We have to do it together. Sorry, I have a lot of opinions.
I was like, I couldn't have said it better.
Anyone else want to augment?
I disagree. I think decision points I think are a critical element in understanding when those are. I still believe that students don't understand the skills that they need, and they don't realize if they actually have them or not. And so one of my favorite examples, I still believe I'm a recruiter, is we always look at people that are in the fraternity and sorority system, and you look at anyone that was part of that was a rush chair, or that was part of rush committee. They literally are recruiters. That is what they do, and there is no major for recruiting. Yet, we've developed a huge industry around getting people there. So I believe that there needs to be a better classification of skills. There needs to be better assessments of who gets these. And then to Christine's point around the decision points, like, yeah, go, if you're in a fraternity, go be part of Rush. If you think that you want to be, a people person down the road, that's a great way to do it. There are lots of other opportunities that college affords us that I believe students are taking advantage of, but I don't think they're doing it to the level that they need to in order to get to what they would consider success, not what we might consider success.
So we've talked about career outcomes. There's also first you need to graduate, right? In order to get there. Is there anything that career services or employers or the portal or the platforms that are on can be using to actually change the tide on graduation rates? You have universities which can struggle anywhere with kind of 30% up to 60 or 70% graduation rates. Can we be doing anything differently from a career services standpoint or from a platform standpoint to really change that environment?
I mean, from Handshake's perspective, we're sitting on a lot of data. And so we've actually recently just started to build out our data team so that we can actually take a look and analyze some of the insights that we have to really surface, are there particular points in the student's journey as they go through their experience that actually would lend itself to being good interventions so that you might be able to keep a student from freshman year to sophomore year, or that you might be able to, there was one institution I was talking to recently where they don't actually have an issue between their first and second year retention, which is one of the most common metrics when you're looking at student success. They actually have an issue between junior year and senior year. And so that was really interesting for them to be able to say, wow, why are we losing them at that particular point? What do we need to do? Is it because they're not getting enough support? Is it because they don't see a particular future? What is that about that piece, right? And so I know as a company, we're sitting on a lot of data, and we're really excited in the next couple of years to really kind of dig into that so that we can help surface those insights back to our university partners to really help them with that student success question.
Our view from our platform is that there needs to be a business just focused on that. And for us to try to take that on, we would be doing a disservice, because that would have to be our sole focus, especially within the communities in which we're operating and trying to serve. And so while there are things that we do, we have like a content platform, we try to do mentoring at scale. So there's a lot of content, there's a lot of videos, there's a lot of inspiration that we can provide to individuals on the platform. And of course we collect a lot of information as well. But that's really where it stops, because we believe it's not, we are not situated to drive graduation rates, because again, I think that's something that has to be such a particular focus, and there's such a responsibility that comes with that, especially to the audience in which we're connecting with, that we don't want to do it incorrectly. And so we pass that on to other organizations to do it, because that's their sole focus. But what we can do, again, is just drive that inspiration to let individuals know that once you do get through, here are your professional opportunities and what that can mean for your families.
And there are companies that to Porter's point, that do this. There's Instructure and EAB and a variety of companies that service higher ed really well in spotting where there might be, like how do we get them through? I think that the bigger issue to me is it's a top of funnel problem. We are going to see, we're estimating that there's going to be about 10% fewer students that actually go to college over the next 5 years. We saw the University of Illinois, I believe, took out insurance because of the amount of the amount of foreign students that were full paying that absolutely plummeted this year due to political issues. So I think it's the graduation stuff, like there will always be hits and misses there, but to me it's a huge top of the funnel problem.
Great. We probably have time for one or two questions from the audience. I'd love to hear from the audience if you have any questions for the panel.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, so
We have a mic right here if you want to.
can I yell?
Sure.
Sure.
That's from Smart. So specifically using ASU as a reference, as we are moving more to the non-traditional model for students and away from bricks and mortar recruiting, I'd love to get your thoughts on that, since a lot of this was focused on the bricks and mortar traditional pathways. It sounds like all of you guys are really playing in that innovation space to help bridge some of those gaps. As you're doing online or non-traditional learning, what are the pathways for innovation, I guess you would say, that you guys are seeing? Is anybody doing it really well?
So I'll start from a Yale perspective. Event-based recruiting is the traditional recruiting, right? And it's you go and you live on campus. Maureen knows this better than anyone. And we believe that that's going to continue at places where there's just always going to be great ROI. I thought I saw Starbucks on there. Like I'm sure.
I'm asking for the SCAP scholars, basically.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like I'm sure.
Thousands of students that go
Yeah.
to ASU that don't stay in Arizona. So what are the ways that you guys can cater to them through tools and technologies for context?
So our belief is that the event-based recruiting will continue to be big and will continue to, but it'll be more focused. And so they're utilizing platforms like Yellow for a recruiting CRM to be able to source from excellent databases where they can go and engage. And then it's how do we classify through primarily assessments that these students have these skill sets. And so we are seeing more of our customers have a campus recruiting team, and then they have a rest of world team. And that rest of world team is a full-blown campus recruiters that never visit campus. And we have one of our customers is announcing that at our conference at the Yellow conference in a few weeks, that this is the first time that they are having a full-blown team that is going out sourcing. They are looking at non-traditional educational experiences. They are looking at skills. They are looking at a variety of assessments, and they're ahead of the curve.
I would just add that through Handshake, what we're seeing is we're working with a lot of employers on their virtual recruiting strategy. So many say that they have a campus recruiting strategy, but there are still plenty out there, even the really big ones that are just starting to build out what their virtual recruiting strategy looks like. And so we're actually seeing significantly more like virtual happy hours that are happening, so that students from everywhere are able to actually engage with employers in a much more personalized and intimate sort of experience. So there's more events, there's more virtual, but they're also much more intimate than they were before, and that's definitely what we're seeing. And so that, in addition to, on the employer end, proactive outreach. And so we're really encouraging students in particular that are online students, for example, to make sure that your profile is complete. Make sure that you are putting in a review. Make sure that you are asking questions or answering questions on the Q&A platform. Engage in the peer messaging. Those are some of the aspects that allow them to have greater visibility, so that employers can also find them and search and sift for them, so that they have that more personalized experience through the platform.
And we do a combination of both. So we have a virtual recruiting strategy because we're a small company. We don't have a recruiter for every single school. We have a smaller team, and there's no way we can actually get to all the students we want to get to. We want to be able to reach all these schools across the country without having to physically go there. One of the things I had done 3 years ago was I was like, we're not going to career fairs anymore. We can't control the message. We don't know who's going to come talk to us. Like, it's just, there wasn't enough of a unique experience. So we've been working on more of a virtual strategy along with still going to campus to kind of, I would say we're going more the virtual route, but to be able to have access to more students.
Great. Well, I want to extend a warm thank you to our panel for joining us today, and thank you everyone for coming.